Los Angeles, California, June 22, 2005. In the early morning hours, traffic detective Nelson Hernandez gets a call for what looks like a hit and run in the upscale neighborhood of Westwood.
There was a man in the alley, dead, and they wanted me to come out and investigate it.
A middle-aged man lies face up in the center of the alley. There's a bicycle a few feet away. The front wheel is off, as though the man had been changing a tire when he was hit by a car.
We checked the tire and it was hard. It had air in it. And then the other thing was, well, if he's going to work on the tire, why would he put his helmet on top of the tire? It just didn't make any sense. And why would he stop here in darkness? Why would he just walk the bike down to the end of the alley where there's light?
The man has nothing in his pockets except for 2 photo IDs.
So it was very clear that someone wanted to tell us who this guy was.
His name is Kenneth McDavid. Hernandez notes that McDavid's clothes are covered in grease, most likely from the bottom of a car, unusual for a hit and run.
Usually pedestrians will get hit and then they will either get pushed to the side of the road or will flip over the car and they will land someplace else. They would not have all that grease from the undercarriage. So there were a few things there that just didn't look right.
Once the sun comes up, Hernandez combs the area for witnesses and inquires about any surveillance video taken that night. One of the stores on the block has several cameras in the alley.
We looked at the video that this camera had captured, and we could see tail lights of vehicles entering the alley and traveling southbound in the alley.
The camera doesn't capture the victim, but there's something suspicious about one of the cars that enters the alley.
The brake lights came on, all lights went out. The lights came on 5 minutes later, and the vehicle just drove off. It appeared to be a Ford Taurus or a Mercury Sable station wagon.
He can't make out the license plate number. All he has is the possible make and model of the car and the dead man's IDs. He follows the only lead he has, McDavid's last known address, 1843 Cherokee Lane.
We made a follow-up to that address. We talked to the manager and she said, yeah, he used to live here. He used to live on the 4th floor.
Ken McDavid played classical piano and worked as a disc jockey in his hometown of Sacramento. He moves to LA to try his hand at writing screenplays. He can't make it as a screenwriter and eventually becomes homeless. The building manager at 1843 Cherokee Lane tells Detective Hernandez what she knows about McDavid. An older woman named Helen Golay takes him off the streets and pays his bills for many months.
She appeared to be a well-to-do type person. Why would this lady allow this supposedly homeless man to stay in her apartment for so many months?
Before Hernandez can track Golay down, he finds out that she's gone to the morgue, claiming to be McDavid's fiancée. She identifies the body and requests that he be cremated. Then things get stranger. Another woman, Olga Rutterschmidt, who claims to be McDavid's cousin, shows up at the police station asking for a copy of the police report.
Usually, when a family member comes to the station, they're hurting because their loved one died. So they want us to explain to them the report. Many cases, they cry and so on and so forth. And they have questions. Not in this case. They basically came in, got the copy, and out the door.
Rutterschmidt's cold, businesslike demeanor leaves a profound impression. And then, more red flags. Toxicology comes back. Ken McDavid's body has large amounts of 2 prescription medications, including a sleep aid, Ambien.
Why would you be taking a sleeping pill if you're going to go out and ride your bike?
Hernandez begins to wonder if Ken McDavid's death was no accident, if someone set him up. But if it's murder, what's the motive?
It was just frustrating. I just didn't have enough to be able to solve this case.
Time passes with no new leads. 2 months after Ken McDavid's death, a life insurance claim comes into Money, Mutual of New York. Ed Webster is an investigator assigned to the case. The claim is for $1 million.
The beneficiaries were Olga Rutterschmidt and Helen Golay. The contract was written in the context that Kenneth McDavid was a businessman. These two women were his business partners in a company called HKO Associates, which, you know, is an acronym for Helen, Kenneth, and Olga. They claimed that he made about $60,000 in annual income, and that if he passed, their business would be adversely affected.
Ed Webster soon discovers that Helen and Olga told police that they were McDavid's fiancée and cousin, not business partners. Something doesn't feel right. Webster flies to L.A. to try to get some answers.
There had been a medical examiner's report, and when I looked at that, it was the first time I saw Kenneth McDavid represented as a homeless man, which flew in the face of all the documents that we had at Underrated.
And there is more.
The address that was listed as his home address was actually Helen's address in Santa Monica. The address that was listed on the application as his business address was Olga's address in West Hollywood. So those were clearly misrepresented.
It looks like Helen and Olga are definitely in business together. The question is, what kind of business? They take in a homeless man, apply for $1 million life insurance policy on him, lie about their relationships to him, and now he's dead. Webster tries to schedule a meeting with Helen Golay and Olga Rutterschmidt to ask them about Ken McDavid. To his surprise, all he gets is doors slammed in his face.
Neither of these two women would speak with me, ever. They would never call me back. They left cards in the mailbox, I screamed from the sidewalk, I did everything. And they just flat out refused to talk to me. Their expectation was to collect $1 million in life insurance proceeds. Answering my questions would certainly be one step towards fulfilling that goal, and they just wouldn't do it.
The two women's reaction makes Webster even more suspicious. He decides it's time to talk to the LAPD. When he and Detective Hernandez put the evidence they found together, they're confident there's more to Ken McDavid's death.
Why would this ladies be taking life insurance policies on a guy that appeared to be homeless?
Hernandez shows Webster the grainy surveillance video taken of the alley. As they start to piece the puzzle together, the two women who come across as nice old grannies are beginning to look like cold-blooded killers.
They paid a lot of money in premiums for $1 million worth of life insurance. And they paid a lot of money for rent and housing. So if you take all of that in mind, the only way that they could capitalize on their investment is if he died.
Next on American Greed, a coincidence that's too close for comfort for police reveals another victim of the killer grannies. In Los Angeles, Detective Nelson Hernandez investigates a hit-and-run in a Westwood alley. The victim, Ken McDavid, was once a homeless man until two older women take him in and put him up in an apartment. But a puzzle is unraveling, and now what once appeared to be two grannies lending a helping hand is starting to look suspicious. The two women file for benefits on two insurance policies they take out on McDavid. The total, $1 million. Detective Hernandez talks about the case with a colleague, Detective Willman, when they make a startling discovery.
I said, Lee, this just didn't make any sense. Got this guy in the alley, and now I get this insurance guy telling me that these two old ladies in their 70s have insurance policies on this guy totaling $1 million.
He had mentioned that the guy was in an alley, got hit by a car, and had life insurance policies. I'm thinking in my mind, hey, I had this before too. I walked back to where we keep our unsolved fatals and our cold cases. Well, back in November of '99, this is who I was dealing with.
Detective Willman's victim is Paul Vados. In 1999, Vados, a homeless man, is found dead in an alley, an apparent victim of a hit and run. Two older ladies claim to be next of kin.
And he said, did you get the names of those two ladies? And I said, yeah, one of them is Olga, the other one is Helen. He said, those are the same names that I got for my two old ladies. Do you have a phone number for them? 310. Says, wait a minute, that's the same phone number that I got from my two old ladies.
When Detective Willman talks to Helen Golay, she claims to be Varos's fiancée.
She had zero emotion on the phone about what happened, and most people do.
Later, Olga Rutterschmidt follows up with a phone call claiming to be Paul Varos's cousin.
She came in a couple of weeks later for a copy of the police report. She had no emotion. She had no interest in the investigation. She just wanted to get the police report and leave.
The parallels between Paul Varos's case in 1999 and Ken McDavid's in 2005 are a little too close for comfort. Two homeless men with sizable life insurance policies literally run over and crushed to death in two different alleys.
Made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Gave me the kind of chilling feeling.
And that's when we looked at each other and it was, bingo, we got more than a traffic accident here. These two old ladies are killing the homeless.
The irony of the situation doesn't escape them. Two detectives who sit across from each other just happened to hit on two identical cases?
It was a miracle, basically. The odds of us sharing this same information, the odds are just 1 in a billion.
Insurance investigator Ed Webster hears about the new development in the case and begins pounding the pavement. If what he and the police suspect is right, there's a method to how Helen and Olga find and choose their victims. He has a theory that the two women are searching out victims on Skid Row and in treatment centers.
The perfect vehicle for these women to capture these fellows would be in rehabs or AA meetings where people are open. They can identify people who don't have family. They can identify homeless people. You know, they can identify people that would not be missed.
His hunch pays off.
I was able to find the Presbyterian Church in North Hollywood where they actually were capturing these guys. Vados was there, McDavid was there, and there were predictable gatherings of homeless people there. So that was like a home run for me.
Ken McDavid and Paul Vados were regulars at Hollywood Presbyterian Church's homeless shelter. Two of the seemingly good souls who come to help out are Helen Golay and Olga Rutterschmidt. Pastor Charles Suheda remembers them.
My first impression of Helen and Olga was good. They were nicely dressed. Now, they didn't actually talk about volunteering there or serving there at all, but they did express an interest and wanted to know, what we were doing. If they're coming for the first time, we always explain to them a little bit about history and how people can actually volunteer in the program.
They do reach out to a few of the homeless men. They seem interested in their plight, but they're not. They prey on their desperation and isolation. They tell them each the same story. They can help. They offer what's irresistible to a homeless person, food and shelter. What the homeless men don't know is that the women have a plan, and it's timed to perfection. They immediately take out insurance policies on the men, saying they are either business partners or relatives. Then they wait. It takes 2 years before they can collect on the insurance policies. They guard their prey like investments for that 2-year period.
By housing them for 2 years, they would know who they communicated with and who they didn't communicate with, and that there was nobody. They would become totally dependent on these two women, and they would know from conversation and phone call or whatever that they had nobody else. So they would feel comfortable in having them disappear.
Once the 2 years are up and the women can collect, the men are history. And they start looking for their next victim. In downtown LA, Jimmy Covington is down on his luck, living on the streets.
Mostly the hardest part of being out there is just trying to get back up out of the street, because you need a little help. I mean, I can work a little bit, but I just couldn't get the housing that I needed. I couldn't get the medical attention at first, and I had to really struggle to get those things.
Olga watches Jimmy. He sleeps behind a church, and the security guard has just kicked him out. One day, while Covington is walking in downtown LA, Olga approaches him.
Olga approached me. She came right up to me and asked me, "Are you homeless?" I kind of said, "Well, why were you asking?" She said, real anxious. Well, I'm an advocate for homeless, and I've helped other homeless guys, and I can get you benefits, and I can get you $2,000 a month, plus I can pay you $15 a day, and also have a little place for you to stay right now if you want to come up and fill out some paperwork for me. I said, okay, I'll try it out. Where's this place at? And she said, right behind you upstairs. I went, whoa, okay. I'll go up and see what this woman's all about.
Olga takes Jimmy to an office building across the street near the intersection of El Centro and Hollywood Boulevard. She takes him upstairs to a small office space that's sparsely furnished.
She came back the next day and she had some more paperwork. And then she started wanting my mother's name and her social security number, her maiden name, and my dad's stuff and all their medical background and history. And I said, I don't have that information for you right now. I can't get it. She started banging on the desk and her fist was sticking out and her eyes were sticking out. I'm just thinking that she's not right. I don't know what her situation was.
Jimmy lives at the office building on El Centro for 4 days, but he reaches the breaking point when he hears Helen and Olga fighting outside his door.
And I said, here's your key back. I shut the door and I left.
A smart move, as Jimmy will later realize. Helen and Olga apply for an $800,000 life insurance policy on his head. Unlike Vados and McDavid, Jimmy Covington lives to tell about it. Back at the LAPD, Detectives Hernandez and Willman confront the shocking truth about Helen and Olga.
It seemed to me unimaginable to think that two old ladies in their 70s could be conspiring to kill homeless people.
The case is getting big, and LAPD's homicide squad is called in. Next on American Greed, with an undercover camera rolling, Helen and Olga finally talk.
I don't care. Thank you.
What they say could land them in prison.
If you're not going to pay me the full amount, this has been a total waste of my time.
Wait, one more question then. Call the police if you don't leave me alone.
Hey, break the door.
I go. Hey, listen.
Ooh.
And later, do the pair have another potential victim in their sights? In Los Angeles, two men, Ken McDavid and Paul Vados, are found dead in two different alleys 6 years apart. LAPD detectives believe both men were killed by Helen Golay and Olga Rutterschmidt. But Helen and Olga are unlikely suspects, both in their 70s with no criminal records.
Most of the population we deal with, we plug their name into these computers. The computers start smoking and spit out 30 pages of information. With Helen and Olga, there's nothing. We don't know if they're related. We don't know what their connection is. We don't know what their connection is to the victim, if any.
The women are put on round-the-clock surveillance. 24 police officers watch their every move.
Detective Sanchez and I are kind of floundering around trying to figure out, well, what are we going to get in the daily lives of Helen and Olga? What are we going to learn? We started reaping the rewards of the surveillance almost immediately. And we started learning who they would go see during the day, where they went, where they banked.
They're the perfect odd couple. Helen Golay drives a Mercedes and lives just a few blocks from the ocean in upscale Santa Monica. She's a creature of habit. She lunches at Izzy's Deli several times a week and gets a reputation as a bad tipper. Olga, an immigrant from Hungary, is athletic. She takes long walks and climbs steep trails through the Hollywood Hills.
To our amazement, they were never, ever seen together. And it's not like Olga comes over for pot roast on Thursday nights or something. It's just nothing.
With surveillance on the suspects underway, detectives meet with the victim's family. Ken McDavid's family is surprised to hear he had a fiancée.
He never mentioned these ladies, or never mentioned a fiancé, or their names never came up.
Meanwhile, Ed Webster, the insurance investigator from Mutual of New York, is compiling a mountain of evidence.
I was able to call other companies just to determine if they had coverage, and I found that there was a lot more coverage on McDavid and there was a lot of coverage on Vados, all of which was in favor of Helen and Olga. There wasn't a single contract out there that had anyone else as a beneficiary.
In fact, there are 20 insurance policies with a face value of more than $5 million. Armed with what he thinks is a good cause to pull the plug on his company's insurance, Webster returns to the women's homes to get some answers, this time with LAPD homicide detective Rosemary Sanchez by his side. But they can't get in. Helen's house is surrounded by an 8-foot wooden gate, and she won't answer the door. At Olga's residence, they meet resistance of a different kind.
Ed's knocking on the door. Who is it? And he identifies himself, Ed Webster from Mutual of New York. Immediately, she's busy now. She can't come to the door. She's taking a bath. So we said we'd wait for her. No. I don't want to talk to you. Well, we'll come back later. No, I have nothing to say. She did not want to talk to Ed Webster at all.
But now Webster has another card to play. He calls Helen Golay and sets up a meeting at her favorite deli, supposedly to deliver her insurance check.
We were just reaching for anything that was going to help us build our murder case. In our minds, now we're thinking, okay, they're murderers, and we got to get them off the street here.
Detective Sanchez is with him. This time, she's wired for audio, and she has a small camera that looks like a button on her shirt.
Is your signature on here?
Yeah.
That's where you signed it? When we met Helen initially, the first thing out of her mouth was, I'm not answering any. I'm here for my checks. Don't ask me no questions.
But instead of the $1 million check, he hands Helen a refund for her premium payments. He says the insurance company is canceling the policy. She's outraged.
I gave her the letter and the check, and she read it, and she threw the whole thing at us, and just started ranting that it was unacceptable. She was going to call her lawyer.
If you're not going to pay me the full amount, this has been a total waste of my time. I am very unhappy. It's caused me a lot of grief and heartache and problems.
And then she went outside, and we waited, but she clearly was not coming back.
I'm thinking, oh yeah, she is just an evil, greedy woman that needs to go down. They're involved. They killed him. How they did it, we don't know yet. So we're on it.
Now it's Olga's turn. They arrange to meet her in a bank lobby, but she doesn't show. Helen could have warned her. They go to her apartment and knock on the door. This time, Detective Sanchez gets it all on tape with her undercover camera.
We're knocking on the door. She's pissed off. Talk to my lawyer. If we don't get away from the door, she's going to throw hot water on us. I say, go ahead.
Then I told her that, her deal might be different than Helen's. And so she was willing to open the door and take the letter.
Please, give me the letter here.
There you are.
Thank you. This is Moni's check. What is this $1,800? What is this?
It's a refund for the premiums that you paid.
No, we don't accept this. What is this?
Read it. Read the policy there. The letter.
I don't care. Thank you.
If you have
Wait, one more question then. Okay, go ahead. Quit slamming. You gotta break the door. Hey, listen. Ooh.
Neither one of them would engage for a second. Not for a second.
Next on American Greed.
I have to call my lawyer.
As fraud evidence mounts, investigators make arrests. But can they prove murder?
There you go.
Who has done this to me and why? Oh my, that's a lie. This is assumption.
In Los Angeles, Helen Golay and Olga Rutterschmidt are trapped. Helen is angry.
If you're not going to pay me the full amount, this has been a total waste of my time.
Olga is even more blunt.
What is this?
Read it. Read the policy there. The letter.
I don't care. Thank you.
Their behavior bolsters detectives' darkest suspicions that the two women killed Paul Vados and Ken McDavid for insurance money.
You just see her and you're like, yeah, she's so evil. Yeah, she would do it.
I think everybody involved in this case knew that these women were as hard as it could to believe they were killing these guys. So they knew they weren't normal grannies.
The circumstantial evidence is compelling, but investigators have no smoking gun. They plan to buy some time by first building a mail fraud case.
The charges fall into play when you make your monthly premium payment, and you put a fraudulent application in an envelope, put a stamp on it, and you put it in the United States mailbox. Well, each time you do that, that's one count of mail fraud.
Continuing investigation finds that Helen and Olga apply for 26 fraudulent life insurance policies with multiple companies. The face value totals close to $7 million, but the applications are filled with lies. They lie about addresses, income levels, and most importantly, their relationships to the men. They claim to be fiancé and cousin to both dead men on some claims, business partners on others, when in reality, Vados and McDavid are homeless strangers they take in off the street.
Those were the kinds of things that made it immediately apparent that there was fraud.
To help make the case, the FBI gets involved.
Anytime we identified a bank account, credit cards, we would start subpoenaing the records, and there were a wealth of information. We found that Helen was actually wiring money from her account to Paul Vados' account to pay premiums, so it would appear to the insurance company that he was making the premium payment. In terms of proving a fraud case, it made my life really easy. I mean, it was just one pack of lies after another.
As investigators build a mail fraud case, the LAPD has Helen and Olga under 24-hour surveillance. They learn that Olga is meeting regularly with an elderly Hungarian man named Joseph Gabor.
Surveillance has taken pictures of Olga, Mr. Gabor. She's leading him into banks, opening bank accounts, side streets, on the back of her car, signing papers, and she's obviously instructing him what to do and where to sign. So right before our eyes, they're working up another victim. We're as far as we can go, and I can't have surveillance people on Helen and Olga and watch them run over Mr. Gabor. We can't do that.
On May 18, 2006, 70 agents from the FBI, LAPD, and other agencies arrest Helen and Olga.
I have to call my lawyer.
Okay, we'll take care of that.
All at once, the tentacles go out, and we're going to seize all the information that we can get at one time.
I don't know what is this. What is happening here?
It was a Cecil B. DeMille production. I mean, there was a ton of people.
Bend your knees, come on. There you go.
And it went off basically without a hitch.
Ms. Golay, my name is Sam Meros. I'm with the FBI. You're under arrest for mail fraud.
Mail fraud?
Yes.
But what reason?
For fraud.
There's no proof. No.
It's actually for mail fraud.
I haven't done any mail fraud. What are you talking about?
Insurance.
When Helen was arrested, all she kept saying was, who would do this to me? Who would do this to me?
Who has done this to me and why?
What are you talking about, Helen? Yeah, you did it to yourself.
Perhaps because of experience, Olga is quick to throw Helen under the bus.
There was no insurance fraud. Helen Golay made insurance.
Olga is pretty predictable. She's ranting and raving, and she's quite the talker. We know this by now, that she just never... She's not crazy, but she's very caustic with anybody she comes across on the street.
Oh, my, that's a lie. This is assumption.
Let's just keep...
Anytime.
Helen, on the other hand, comes out, and she's little Miss Innocent. Oh, what's going on? You've got the wrong house. It can't be me. I haven't done anything.
I can't believe this. I have no mail fraud whatsoever.
But inside, Helen's home is filled with evidence against her.
When we searched Helen's residence, there was a book in the living room, and the book was The Sociopath Next Door, with a subtitle or something like that, 1 in 25 Americans has no conscience whatsoever. And we're thinking, gee, that's a strange book for Helen to be reading.
The book is only the tip of the iceberg.
We found a whole bunch of original checks that she had written to pay for premiums for the insurance companies, for the rent on Ken McDavid's apartment. I saw a check Olga had written to a rubber stamp company. We called the owner and met with him. When we went over there, we showed him a picture of Olga. And he said, oh, this is the Black Widow. And we said, what? What are you talking about? I thought maybe he knew something we didn't know.
The stamps are precise copies of her victims' signatures.
But she bought a number of signature stamps, not only in Ken McDavid's name, but also Paul Vados' name, her own husband's name, even Helen Golay's name. She would tell the stamp guys, yeah, I'm helping out the homeless, or I'm trying to help these people who can't get in here and pay their bills. Well, supposedly, she is doing her good deed for society.
The money trail highlights the viciousness of the crime. Helen and Olga planned to keep the men alive just long enough to avoid suspicion, and then lead them to slaughter.
We found scratch paper in Olga's apartment where she was literally figuring out how much premium they were going to have to pay over a 2-year period. That's pretty good circumstantial evidence, I think.
They just fed them and housed them like animals, just for the sole purpose of killing them.
While the LAPD and the FBI are searching their homes, Detectives Kilcoyne and Sanchez take Helen and Olga in for questioning.
We put them together in an interview room, and like a couple of convicts, they immediately start shushing each other, but Olga can't keep her mouth shut. She's just running at the mouth.
The interrogation is being taped. What the two women don't realize is that when detectives leave the room, the video is still running.
Why did you make all these extra insurances? Too many you had. There's a limit. You can't do that many. I know that. You were greedy. That's the problem.
I mean, this is a gold mine for us. I mean, right before our eyes, there are little rowboats sinking fast.
We had no problem with the relationship. You pay me and be nice and don't make extra things. I was doing everything for you.
They're hanging themselves. And Helen knows, she's cognizant of what's going on. She keeps trying to shut Olga up, but it's not working.
You are wasting your time and energy with this. And secondly...
No, we're going to go to jail, honey. They're going to lock you up.
I don't think so.
And they come just short of saying that, that they personally did it.
Kenneth wanted these policies.
Yes.
He signed for these policies. And we happen to be punished because of what he wanted. That's not right. Now remember the bottom line.
And I was the cousin with the fiancé, baloney.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Next on American Greed, the police have the murder weapon, which leaves one question.
Who's behind the wheel?
The shocking answer when American Greed returns. In May of 2006, Helen Golay and Olga Rutterschmidt are in federal lockup, looking at 8 counts of mail fraud. But LAPD detectives suspect them of much more. Murder. They believe Helen and Olga have killed 2 homeless men, Ken McDavid and Paul Vados, to collect $2.8 million in life insurance payouts. The problem is, investigators have trouble believing that Helen, who's 75, and Olga, 73, killed the 2 men by themselves.
We knew that they had committed murder. We just didn't have direct evidence linking them to it.
We can't just seem to wrap our brains around the fact that these little old gals are that vicious that they are actually behind the wheel of the car. We're holding out for more and more information all the time, as are the prosecutors. They're just, you're not there yet, you're almost there, but who's behind the wheel?
During a search of Helen's apartment, FBI Special Agent Sam Mayrose finds an answer to that question in Helen's daily planner.
I come across this one page, and there's a Post-it on it, and it's got a partial tag, a partial VIN. I was like, holy smoke, Eureka, we found gold, because we knew that had to be the car. So I gave that to Dennis. He called back to his office, and within minutes, they had the complete VIN number, the license plate number, knew who the current registered owner was, and from there, it was just Katie bar the door.
It's a 1999 silver Mercury Sable station wagon, just like we have in the video. And we go out and they locate it.
Now the pieces are beginning to fit together to form the perfect scenario of murder for money. The night of the murder, shortly after the timestamp on the surveillance video shows the Mercury Sable pulling out of the alley, Helen Golay makes a call to an auto repair shop from her cell phone. She's hit something and broken the fuel line.
She actually called for road service on the night of McDavid's murder, 1 block away from McDavid's murder off Westwood Boulevard, to have a 1999 Mercury Sable station wagon, the car we've got in our lab right now, towed back to her residence.
The phone call puts Helen at the scene of the crime. She abandons the car in the alley behind her home. The lots later impounded by the city. The underside of the car hasn't been touched since that night. It's a perfect specimen for forensic testing.
Well, the Highway Patrol people put it up on a lift, and they start going through the undercarriage of the car. On the right side of the undercarriage is what they call wiping, and the road grease is absent. Well, that shows that they ran over something that wiped the bottom of the car clean.
Kilcoyne believes that something was the body of Ken McDavid. When McDavid was found in the alley, his clothes were covered with car grease. There are dark spots on the underside of the vehicle that police think could be Ken McDavid's blood. They send samples to the lab for DNA testing. The answer could conclusively identify Golay's car as the murder weapon. Helen and Olga are sitting in federal prison arrested for mail fraud to buy police time to build a murder case against them. The mail fraud is easy to prove. Each one of the life insurance policies the two women take out on the dead men is a pack of lies. In some, Helen and Olga claim to be business partners. In others, fiancés and relatives. But Helen and Olga aren't worried. In a telephone conversation, Helen tells her daughter she's confident police can't build a case against them. She's wrong. 2 weeks later, the DNA results come back. The spots on the underside of the car are Ken McDavid's blood.
So then we all realize these are evil, evil women, and they are in fact the ones behind the wheel of the car. It's our belief that they probably met him, took him to dinner, and the combination of this prescription medication, which we found in powder form mixed together in a prescription vial in her medicine chest, they're sprinkling that in his drink that night. And we can see from the videotape, the car goes down the alley, passes under the one camera, the brake light comes on, the lights go out. Now, for 4 to 5 minutes, the lights are out, which is our belief that that's the time that they're pushing McDavid out of the car. The backup lights come on, the car comes back about 50 feet, stops, and then the car moves forward. So they've laid him out, they back up to get a running start, and then they go forward and they just bulldoze over this man, crushing him to death. And it's at this point we believe that the fuel line is pulled from the undercarriage of the car, and then because of the 15% grade on that alley, the car rolls down to the next block, and that's where Helen calls for AAA tow to come get her.
The evidence against Helen and Olga is overwhelming. They're charged with 2 counts of murder and conspiracy to commit murder for financial gain. Their relatively cushy lives abruptly change. They trade in their upscale lifestyles for county jail.
You could tell that they were terrified, that this was not part of their world. You know, this was something that you read about maybe in a magazine or the LA Times and you turn the page because it disgusts you. But this is real life in the city, and they were part of it now.
On March 18, 2008, the case goes to trial. Deputy District Attorney Bobby Grace is one of the lead prosecutors.
People said, wow, you know, these people were upwards of 70, 80, going on 80 years old, and they were involved in this complex scheme to murder 2 individuals for financial gain. Even in Los Angeles, that's unheard of. Definitely have never prosecuted anybody as old as they are for murder.
Grace has to prove that these 2 women are not what they appear to be.
I think there's a lot of people out there that would commit crimes to survive or to enrich themselves, but how many of them are willing to go through such elaborate means to get millions of dollars? It's just mind-boggling.
The prosecution has a mountain of evidence, but the coup de grace is a tape of what transpires between the 2 women after they were arrested. Their interrogation is taped, and when detectives leave the room, the little old ladies speak their minds.
Admit it was your fault, because what you did, of course I got angry. You were greedy, that's the problem. We have to cooperate now. We have to attack money together.
That was just really the nail in the coffin, so to speak. Once the jury got an opportunity to really hear from Helen Golay and Olga Rutterschmidt out of their own mouths, then they realized that these women were truly, truly greedy and truly evil, that they were willing to do anything to gain and to profit.
After a 6-week trial, Helen Golay and Olga Rutterschmidt are found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Among those satisfied with the sentence is Jimmy Covington, the victim who got away.
I went around with the papers showing everybody, look, this is, they got him, they were going to kill me, they got him. I went through that trip for a while. I was really ecstatic about it.
Olga and Helen are sent to different prisons. Both women appeal their cases, but in August 2009, their convictions are upheld and the appeals are denied. They will remain in prison the rest of their lives.
That's probably the best punishment for two greedy people like Helen and Olga, that they have to sit out the rest of their natural lives thinking about, why did I let greed drive me to have to spend the rest of my life in prison?
You almost wonder if it was like a drug to them. I joke a lot that it's crack. Maybe they got addicted to it. They just wanted money.
Detective Kilcoyne has an interesting theory about the pair. It all comes down to greed.
If they had slowed down, not got so many policies on McDavid in the multiple millions of dollars, they'd still be out there.
Los Angeles, California, June 22, 2005. In the early morning hours, traffic detective Nelson Hernandez gets a call for what looks like a hit and run in the upscale neighborhood of Westwood.
There was a man in the alley, dead, and they wanted me to come out and investigate it.
A middle-aged man lies face up in the center of the alley. There's a bicycle a few feet away. The front wheel is off, as though the man had been changing a tire when he was hit by a car.
We checked the tire and it was hard. He had air in it. And then the other thing was, well, if he's going to work on the tire, why would he put his helmet on top of the tire? It just didn't make any sense. And why would he stop here in darkness? Why would he just walk the bike down to the end of the alley where there's light?
We looked at the video that this camera had captured, and we could see tail lights of vehicles entering the alley and traveling southbound in the alley.
The camera doesn't capture the victim, but there's something suspicious about one of the cars that enters the alley.
The brake lights came on, all lights went out. The lights came on 5 minutes later, and the vehicle just drove off. It appeared to be a Ford Taurus or a Mercury Sable station wagon.
He can't make out the license plate number. All he has is the possible make and model of the car and the dead man's IDs. He follows the only lead he has, McDavid's last known address, 1843 Cherokee Lane.
We made a follow-up to that address. We talked to the manager, and she said, yeah, that...
The man has nothing in his pockets, except for 2 photo IDs.
So it was very clear that someone wanted to tell us who this guy was.
His name is Kenneth McDavid. Hernandez notes that McDavid's clothes are covered in grease, most likely from the bottom of a car, unusual for a hit and run.
Usually pedestrians will get hit and then they will either get pushed to the side of the road or will flip over the car and they will land someplace else. They would not have all that grease from the undercarriage. So there were a few things there that just didn't look right.
Once the sun comes up, Hernandez combs the area for witnesses and inquires about any surveillance video taken that night. One of the stores on the block has several cameras in the alley. Then things get stranger. Another woman, Olga Rutterschmidt, who claims to be McDavid's cousin, shows up at the police station asking for a copy of the police report.
Usually when a family member comes to the station, they're hurting because their loved one died. So they want us to explain to them the report. Many cases, you know, they cry and so on and so forth. And they have questions. Not in this case. They basically come in, got the copy, and out the door.
Rutterschmidt's cold, businesslike demeanor leaves a profound impression. And then, more red flags. Toxicology comes back. Ken McDavid's body has large amounts of 2 prescription medications, including a sleep aid, Ambien.
Why would you be taking a sleeping pill if you're going to go out and ride your bike? He used to live here. He used to live on the 4th floor.
Ken McDavid played classical piano and worked as a disc jockey in his hometown of Sacramento. He moves to LA to try his hand at writing screenplays. He can't make it as a screenwriter and eventually becomes homeless. The building manager at 1843 Cherokee Lane tells Detective Hernandez what she knows about McDavid. An older woman named Helen Golay takes him off the streets and pays his bills for many months.
She appeared to be a well-to-do type person. Why would this lady allow this supposedly homeless man to stay in her apartment for so many months?
Before Hernandez can track Golay down, he finds out that she's gone to the morgue, claiming to be McDavid's fiancée. She identifies the body and requests that he be cremated.